trying to talk to a friend. You're trying to tell a friend about a problem you're having, a difficulty you're experiencing. And the friend keeps wanting to say, oh, I know that. I've had that experience. Your friend, no matter what you say, says, oh yeah, that happened to me. And they keep putting themselves in your story. Have you ever had that experience? So I've already seen some nods, right? Yes. So I think that happens a lot. And I think as friends, that's not really great listening, is it? Right? When we're trying to practice good listening to our friends, that's not the best way to do it. And yet, when we hear the parables, that's exactly what we're supposed to do. For often we are sort of tricked into thinking that the parables are allegory. Right? By allegory, I mean we want the parables to make sense in a one-to-one correspondence. Like as if we could make a chart and say, the king in this parable represents God, and the son represents Jesus, and the people who don't come to the party are the Israelite people. And we want to go through this list and make this one-to-one correspondence. And not just for this parable. If you read commentaries about a lot of parables, or sermons even about a lot of parables, there will be this one-to-one correspondence of the actors in the parable to the actors that we see in the world now, or that we imagine in the world in Jesus' time. Right? But the problem with that is that that's not what parables are, actually. Parables are stories that invite us into them. Jesus told parables not just to be an allegory, a kind of tricky way of telling something. Jesus told parables because of that same phenomenon that we experience with our friends. That when we hear a compelling story, we want to jump right into it and say, oh, I know. I've been there. I've had that experience. And we want to take it over. Well, that's just what Jesus is inviting us to do. In all the parables, but especially in this one. Now, I myself have been wrestling with this parable all week long, and pastors all over the world have been wrestling with this parable all week long, because it's different than the one in Luke. It's very similar to the telling of this story in Luke, except it has this terrible ending where at the end, the person who isn't wearing the wedding garment, weeping and gnashing of teeth. That doesn't sound nice. That doesn't sound friendly. That doesn't sound like Jesus. But the problem is that we're trying to make the allegorical one-to-one correspondence. And that's not what this parable is doing. So let's put that aside. Let's put aside what we think the matching up is. And put that aside. And instead, let's think about this story the way that we would if it was a friend telling us a story and we're jumping into it. So let's think about it that way, right? We have a king who's putting on a wedding banquet for his son, and he invites all of his friends, and they don't come. And now, as I'm retelling this now to you, wonder which person you want to jump into the story as. Right? So they don't come. And in fact, some of them are so rude, they not only don't RSVP, they kill the slaves that invite them. So then the king says, well, let's invite some more people. And some other people come, and those are the good and the bad, the parable says. And when they all show up, one of them is not wearing the right clothes. Now, that means more than just clothing in this parable, of course, right? It means being respectful. It means being appropriate. It means responding to the invitation the right way, right? We've all shown up at a party underdressed or overdressed, right? That's not all this is saying, right? This is saying he didn't respond properly to the invitation, okay? And so then that person was bound and tortured, and there was weeping and gnashing of teeth. See how dramatic this story is? I think, I'm not gonna say, what do you think? What person or actor in this story do you relate to? Just shout out. The person getting married? Anybody else? The king? I relate to the king, that makes sense. Any others? Second? The people who came? See, the thing about this parable is it doesn't feel good, does Jesus told it so that people would feel invited into the story. So it's our challenge as we hear this to not just try to make a one-to-one correspondence, but to try to imagine ourselves in this story. Maybe I'm the one who didn't show up in the right clothing, because maybe I don't always respond to invitation the way that I should. Maybe I don't always respond to God's gracious invitation the way that I should. Or maybe I am like the king, who gets so, involved in my party that I'm trying to be generous, but even then, I want to assault the one who isn't playing by my rules. There's a lot of different ways to engage in this story, but the most important thing I want to invite all of us to do is to try to put ourselves into it. And so over the course of this coming week, my challenge to you is to imagine where you are in this parable and what it is saying for you. Because there is a lesson for each actor in this story. There isn't a right or a wrong person in the story. There's room for growth for us all. And there is room for growth for us all. Amen.